advised, but it's not mandatory. Let's see. So yeah, if anybody knows Annabelle and she's not on here and you want to help her later, that might be cool. If you know anybody else that you're like, I know that person is unable to connect, that would be tricky. Yes, Zach, I appreciate that. I have to keep track of everybody that I've talked to on at least 3 different platforms. My kids' teachers are actually making them like just fill out a Google survey, a little document, and I might consider that because that might be easier. Although ideally we're having meaningful interaction. Okay, so I think we're clear on what we need to record. If you are not sure, I posted the link. Since Liam has been recording these for us, he's been putting them on his YouTube page. So rule number 1 is no hating. Rule number 2 is that, well, it's not a rule. Really, rule number 1 is no hating, and that's it. It's really the only rule. But you can go and you can refer back to these whenever you want via that page. Yeah, what kind of controversy are we having? Yeah, I might have to make a Google form. I still have to put up all the Google assignments and stuff. Like, not gonna lie, this is so much easier in person than over the internet. But okay, let's save our housekeeping questions till the end. And maybe if you're not dying to know the answer to your housekeeping question, you can go listen to the thing I did yesterday, because that was 48 juicy minutes of total and complete housekeeping and everything you ever wanted to know. Okay. Here, yes. I actually saw an article of somebody saying that hydroxychloroquine saved her life, which I was like, really? Because taking it wrong killed some of it. Do we have my Florida girl in here? Is Ariana on? Okay. So these documents that you have in front of you, they're on Google Docs. It's literally the very first thing at the top. It's 92 pages, but like, let's be real, we're not going to actually read all 92 of those pages. I literally, since I didn't have very much time and they had to turn on the copier scanner just for me, I scanned the whole thing as opposed to just picking exactly the pages we need. And since you're not printing it, nobody's really harmed by that. Okay, so if you look at the very first page, it says Lesson 1, Zionism and Arab Nationalism. And this is a pretty cool thing to talk about because both of those things still exist. And of course, we already talked about how nationalism had a huge impact on the start of World War I, and we talked about it a little bit less explicitly, but obviously Hitler was super duper ultra wow, did I say that? Jeez. Okay, so Hitler was obviously super duper nationalist, and that was, in all honesty, his initial justification for invading Poland was that the German people needed this living space and they needed to be healthy, etc. That's where that started. We also start to see around this time, and this will be our next lesson, which we'll do next week on Tuesday at 1 o'clock.
Regular headphones.
What? Do I have what? Oh, so whoever just talked, you should mute yourself. Clearly you were whispering, that wasn't for me. Clicking on the little microphone next to your name on the left-hand side. The unmuted people is making noise. Also, I really want to know who Jonathan 19 is, because we keep on, like, he keeps on messaging me. Well, it's not a ton, but like, okay, cool. That's what I thought. Just wanted to double. Okay, so anyways, nationalism. By 1950, by 1948, it is a thing all over the world. And it has been a thing in a lot of parts of the world for a while, but all of a sudden, it becomes a really big deal. And it's been festering for a long time, and that's what we're going to be talking about starting here. So go ahead, flip the page. And then on the next page, which is labeled page 3, down at the bottom, It says nationalism exercise. And real quick, if you want to do a shout out, you can unmute yourself and you can tell me what you think nationalism is. Like what ideas or concepts do you associate with that? Unmute yourself and share. Okay, yes, Liam, go ahead, unmute yourself and share.
Nationalism is an ideological movement typically embodied by the phenomenon of people wanting to establish a sovereign state or area of control for a national group or typically relatively exclusive national group, or that's how we've seen its implementation is usually pretty specific. There are other nationalistic movements which do kind of tend to just want one kind of unified group, but often you see nationalist movements, especially in Europe, where it's very exclusive nationalism. So it's basically the desire to make a nation state. That's probably how I could have said it.
Yeah, no, that's great. What other things do people associate with nationalism? So yes, usually they are looking for scapegoats. Yes, that's fantastic. Is that Olivia? Thank you. Yeah, so if something goes wrong, you got to find somebody else to blame because you can't you can't blame yourself, right? So if, the state of Kentucky is mad about the poor performance of JCPS, they can't be like, oh, well, maybe it's lousy state standards. No, they have to blame somebody else. And that's the way of the world. Having trouble hearing me? We are very confused about how to spell the word here. Okay, great. Okay, sorry about your connection, Samir. Okay. Yes, so there's so much going on with this, and this is another fantastic example of the British screwing everything up. Okay, so now if you look at page 4, it says at the top, document 1, the Jewish state, Theodore Herzl. Take a quick second and read that to yourself. I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud. It's going to take too long if we do that. But read it and figure out what that means. Okay, right now you're reading document 1 that says the Jewish state 1896, and it is on the page that says 4 at the bottom, which coincidentally is also the 4th one. No, Jonathan, only 2 people talked. Did you hear those 2 other people? Then I don't know. Maybe somebody who is more clever knows the answer to that. Okay, so if you came in a little bit late, you're going to want to go to Google Classroom and open the document that is at the top of the stream that says Arab-Israeli conflict, and we just read the document on page 4. Okay, so here's the deal. This document starts to build the desire for Jewish sovereignty to have a homeland, to have a homeland of their own. And you can see the word sovereignty is bolded. And this is in 1896, right? So this is way, way, way before the Holocaust. This is not motivated by the Holocaust in any way, shape, or form. This is sort of it's interesting, right? Because we usually do consider people who are Jewish to be more of a religious group than a national group. But this is now a religious group that's saying, hey, we would really like to have a homeland. We would like to have a place where we can create laws that are good for us, that are good and consistent with our beliefs and our groups. Okay, so that's 1896. That's nice and early. If you look at the next page, on page 5, we've got another document from the First Zionist Congress, and it this excerpt lays it out. It says, the aim of Zionism is to create for the Jewish people a homeland in Palestine secured by public law. And then it gives some it gives some examples of what they're looking for. Farmers, artisans, laborers, to create a national home, the organization and union of the whole of Jewry in a suitable locale and in general bodies. So something to consider when you are thinking about, we talked about during World War II, is that the concept of world Jewry, maybe with scare quotes around it, that is not, it wasn't necessarily a derogatory thing, right? Like here you see the Zionist Congress actually referring to the Jewish people of the world as world Jewry, and they are looking to form closer, additional, more sustainable connections. Now, that doesn't mean they're trying to take over the world. Does that make sense? Like, for a lot of you that feel a strong connection to a national or ethnic group, you can maybe understand how you might want to continue to be connected with that group, but that is not necessarily associated with taking over the world. Does that make sense? Like, are you with me so far? Somebody? Anybody? Bueller? All right. Let's go ahead then and look at document 3, which is on the page that is labeled 6. Sati al-Husuri. A minute or two to go ahead and read those excerpts as well. People who listen to this later are going to be like, wow, there are big, long gaps. All right. So the first section deals with language. And if you took AP Human, or if you developed a deep understanding from your regular geography class, you should know that language really does, it acts as a centrifugal, with an F, as a centrifugal force, that it's pulling things together. Yes, not an F, it's a P. Thank you all. Okay, so they're having to consider that because the Jewish people are living, or sorry, no, this is an Arab one. They're considering that because there is a belief that there is some commonality between all peoples who speak Arab. A thing that you might not know, and I did not know this until I had a friend who was from Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, they do not speak Arabic; they speak Farsi, and that's kind of an important distinction. Actually, ethnically, it's really important to Afghanis that they've got the Farsi language, which is distinct from Arabic. But here we have people who are seeing themselves to be brethren with, connected to other people who are speaking the Arab language. Okay? I love the second bullet point, nationalist feeling depends on historical memories more than anything else. Yes, and like we talked about before in class, those historical memories don't even have to be real. They can be propagandized. They can be augmented. You can take the real reality and you can pretend that it's better than it was. Like, who knows? Maybe in 40 years, they'll be like, wow, the United States really, really came together during the COVID-19 epidemic. And you can be like, okay, so there is some truth to that. But then there's also like the states competing with the federal government for resources. So maybe that's not a fantastic example of people coming together. Right. Like, can you imagine, like, there might be a time when they're like, wow, Americans really pulled together. And you're like, I mean, okay. Well, and yes, like, it doesn't make sense for the federal government to have stuff stockpiled in warehouses permanently. Like, that's not a great situation. So as far as Corona goes, go ahead and listen to Andy Bashir at 5 o'clock. And Zach, you might have missed this since you're physically not here. it's worth listening to him because Andy Bashir is saying all kinds of interesting things about our patriotic duty and being good neighbors and saying, you're isolated but not alone. So, yeah, okay, but like not total lack of human connection because you these different educational institutions that are streaming online. You've got actual education that is streaming online. It's Liam and Liam and Katie. Happy birthday! What are you guys now? 16? Right. You guys should definitely like do one of those parade things where you like drive around your neighborhood and like honk and hold up signs and like have other people drive around with you, socially distant in their own cars. Like it is kind of a big deal, even though you personally are stuck in your house like the rest of us. If you look in the right places, at least, there are new community connections that are existing. There are rainbows and teddy bears that people are putting up, and as time goes by, there are more rainbows and teddy bears that people are putting up. So, yes, true, Zach. I absolutely. Oh my gosh! Happy birthday, Caroline. But even though you definitely get oxytocin from physical contact, the technological connections, when you're totally starved for physical and social contact, I mean, I don't know. I was pretty happy to like see my colleagues on Zoom, and we don't even hang out that much. But I was like, whoa, it's people, and they're smiling back at me. Yes, Liam has a twin sister. Her name is Katie. She is also on here. Okay, back to the content. Page, the first Arab Congress, Paris 1913. That is on the page. I have not played Bashir Briefing Bingo, but I should. I've played bingo with other things, but not that one. Somebody send me a card and I will do it one of these. Okay, so the first Arab Congress, it says, and I will read this one just so we can move along. Radical and urgent reforms are needed in the Ottoman Empire. I mean, obviously in 1913, it totally sucked. Hey, do you guys have a bingo card from me yet? What do I say a lot? I want to see the bingo card for my class. Nope, not going to play that game with you, Miss Krause. Okay, anyways, it is important to guarantee Ottoman Arabs the exercise of their political rights. Oh, now they believe that they have political rights. By giving them meaningful roles in the administration of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, like the idea that people have political rights. Somebody tell me, where does this idea generate from? Where did that get started? The idea that people have political rights. Okay, perfect. Enlightenment, that's fantastic. Olivia, what even does that say? Okay, so now the Enlightenment thought has spread all the way to like the backwaters of the Ottoman Empire, which is pretty far from started in Paris and London and whatnot. Okay, third, found it important to establish decentralized governments of each of the Arab and Syrian administrative districts, giving them more autonomy within Ottoman Empire. So that is a really good example of them not necessarily seeking complete sovereignty, but the idea that they want to have some level of relative power. The Arabic language must be recognized by the Ottoman Parliament. So there we have language coming up again. Oh, military service will be regional. So they want, and I mean, that's a little bit scary, right? If you're the Ottoman Empire, that should scare you. That they're like, ooh, we Arabs want to serve together in our own regiments, right? Like it's literally the opposite of segregation. It's self-segregation. It's saying we want to do our own thing. We want to have our own commanders, and we're going to be more loyal to our own commanders. They're our commanders. They're not your Ottoman commanders, right? So what was the question? Yeah, they're speaking Turkish in Istanbul for the most part. Okay. Resolutions will be communicated to the Imperial Ottoman government. Oh, well, that's nice. They're going to make resolutions and then just communicate them to the Ottomans. I'm sure the Ottomans were happy about that. And they also wanted people who were friendly to the Ottomans to respect all that. Okay. Go ahead then and look at the page that is labeled 8. It has a nice map. And I think, I haven't actually looked through every page of the scan. I think I managed to scan it in color. Is it scanned in color? Is your map colored? Yes, sweet. Okay. So under Ottoman rule through World War I, okay? So there are all of these different places, different districts, and this area is being controlled by the Ottomans, but not very well. Not very well at all. Okay. So just remember that that had been under Ottoman control. Document 5. Really what you need to know there is just that there's this idea now of Muslim youth. So not only now is there Arabic, but you're starting to see people who are Muslim seeing themselves as a cohesive group as well. And again, that's a little bit different because in Europe, you really had nation-based nationalism where they were looking at political entities and they were not saying, hey, like we're Christian, right? Like we had the Holy Roman Empire for that. And of course, the Reformation really screwed up Europe's ability to be religiously cohesive anyway. But now we have two other groups that are, okay, so Liam, religious-based nationalism is really what you see here, or ethnic-based nationalism, because definitely, although people who are Jewish are not a race, they definitely qualify as an ethnicity. And you could potentially make an argument, I wouldn't be persuaded by it personally, but you could make an argument that people who consider themselves to be Arab constitute an ethnicity. You say religion wouldn't be a nation? Well, it's just unusual, right? Like to cohere on the basis of religion is different than to cohere on the basis of blood. If you have a religion that you believe is genetically passed down, like Zoroastrianism, for instance, like if you have a really, really strong ethnic definition, there's that. Agreed. Right. That's why I'm not persuaded by the argument that even though there is sort of a pan-Arab nationalism, I wouldn't say that all people who are Arab or even all people who are Arab and live in areas that are predominantly Arab are the same ethnicity. Like, that's ridiculous. That's crazy. So, well, what we start seeing here, and Liam, the distinction I was trying to make is that in these instances, clearly religion is a cultural feature and people who experience nationalism usually share cultural features in common. But it seems like in this case, maybe the cultural feature being religion is primary as opposed to secondary. We're going to skip a few pages. See, look, you've got all these graphic organizers that I was going to make you do, and I'm not going to make you write them all out, but take a look. Okay, that is just fine. Remember, you are not required to be here. This is for your benefit, but nobody is required to be here. If you need to step away for a good reason or a crummy reason, you're good. You're totally good. Okay, so let's take a look, though, at nationalism versus patriotism. I went to a professional development. We got to do this one, and I had a little bit too much fun with this. You're bored. If you leave this because you're bored, that's a crummy reason. In a classroom, it's trickier to do that. You at least have to pretend that you have to go to the bathroom before you can leave just because you're bored. Okay. So, nationalism versus patriotism. This one is on page 12. Pride in one's country. Is that, you can just type N or P for nationalism or patriotism. So the first one, pride in one's country, nationalism or patriotism? Social pressure there. Yeah, I think that your patriotism would generally have pride in one's country. I mean, yes, nationalists are going to have that too, but like, yeah, patriots are probably going to have that. Group that desires sovereignty for their country. Agreed? Love of country. You have to love your country to be patriotic, or can you be patriotic without like actually loving the country? I mean, I think it's an interesting question. Does this assume a multinational state as opposed to a nation state? Okay, so those are really interesting responses. Oh. Yeah, you can be patriotic and wanting to improve a bad country. Yes, agreed. Also with Molly. Yeah, no, those are some really good thoughts. So my kid is on a call. I think he's wearing headphones, but he's on a call with his math class, and he just shared that he's stuck at home with his two parents who are teachers 24/7. Oops. Oh, that's interesting. I would not say patriotism does nothing, but I would say that nationalists probably do more. Oh, nationalism even in a multinational state. You really can. Right? Like white nationalism. But I mean, there are really people who are just really pro-America, who aren't exclusively racist. I mean, you probably have some people who are very, very much freedom-loving, but really don't give a what about somebody's skin color. Okay, what else? Belief that one's country is better than others. Well, nationalism doesn't have to be informed either. Read probably. Okay, fair, Hannah. That's true. Although I was talking about the people who are very freedom-loving and also very pro-American. So, Liam, this is just abstract, which I know is killing you. It's just abstract, though. If it helps you to think about it as a multinational state, do that, because that's mostly what exists in the world today. It's a sacrifice for country. I think there are plenty of soldiers who are patriotic that are willing to sacrifice for their country that maybe wouldn't completely fit the definition of a nationalist. I think that patriotism can include that. Violence often plays a role. And Liam, there are no right or wrong answers. A lot of these are subjective, which I know also hurts. But a lot of these are subjective. The group's belief in the right to self-determination of the country. Right. I mean, because yeah, I mean, war is a thing that countries do, and they don't always do it for nationalist reasons. I mean, the United States, you could make a very strong argument that we got involved in the Gulf War, the first one, for economic reasons. but we definitely weren't there for nationalist reasons, unless we were just trying to flex on other countries, which I mean maybe is somewhat true, but that wasn't the only reason, and that wasn't, I wouldn't even say it was the primary reason. Often involves symbols and civic celebrations. Like, I'll save you the trouble. That one's really both. Being, I think that patriotism includes those things, but like if you look at some Hitler rallies, you can, I mean, that's really on very, very full display there. Okay. Group identity around shared values, language, history. Well, that one's kind of both too, right? I mean, I would say that a lot of these really are, what's the word? Matter of degree. I know. Sorry, I'm torturing you today. What other phrases would you add? What other things do you think would be associated with one or the other or both? Oh, yeah. Yes. Tell me again, you were not even born for that, right? You were born after 9/11, all y'all? I've told you all, it was crazy the way the patriotism level went through the roof after that. I didn't even know that the country owned that many flags. All of a sudden, there were flags everywhere, and they never stopped wearing them on their lapels. Um, okay, sorry. Say hi to my son, Alexander. Say hi. The poor kid who's stuck at home 24/7 with two teachers, all school, all the time.
Yeah.
I told them I heard you. Not so bad. I mean, you could be stuck with parents who are both partners, and we could make you do yard work 24/7. Okay. Let's see. What else have we got here? Young Master Krause.
Yes.
I honestly might feel worse for the people who have two parents who think they're teachers than the people who have two parents who are actually teachers. Because, see, I'm like, our reality is tempered by, reality, and understanding that teenagers and stuff like have limits. Well, actual teachers do a lot of managing too. If you guys have ever seen it's this principal from someplace in Kentucky, and he does these little vignettes in his car, and he did one like he was doing a formal observation of parents who are homeschooling their kids at home, and it was pretty crazy. Otis. He is a teacher. I love Mr. A. He's awesome. I would totally take his class if I didn't have to teach my own at the same time. Oh, a teacher, a basketball coach, and a vet. Mr. A? Well, okay, fair. English and journalism and stuff. Skip the graphic organizer, or you can get to skip the exit slip because you are not going anywhere. Is there supposed to be there? Is there a cartoon after the exit slip page for you? Actually looking at hard copies. Okay, cool. So let's look at this political cartoon. And if you can, especially if you've got it on your phone. The person who who is walking out of the room on the far left-hand side has a briefcase that says GB, a nurse's cap. I asked if there was a cartoon next, but we did that. Okay, I'm sorry, it's rotated 90 degrees. It's literally sideways on the page too. So, sorry. Standing around from left to right, the briefcases read USA, USSR, and China. France is sitting on the bed, and then the chart at the end of the bed is labeled Palestine, and it shows heart rate and like something's going wrong there. And then there is a medicine bottle in the hand of the USA guy that says trusteeship, and there is a medicine bottle on the nightstand that says partition. Okay. Am still relying on being right next to my laptop's microphone. And here's the deal. I have Bluetooth headphones that are new, and they've got a microphone, but it's it feels weird talking with headphones in. Okay. So hold this cartoon in your mind of Palestine being a patient in a bed who is clearly doing very poorly, and all of these
Jacob
different.
H. said hi.
So France had a very strong interest, but I will come back to the relevance of that. So like sort of hold this image in your mind, and if taking a screenshot or taking a photo with your phone is convenient, you might want to do that, because technically this is not where this page is supposed to be. Okay. All right, so broken promises. This is the fun part. This is where Britain screws everything up. Yes, among others, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Okay, so do you guys see in the document where it starts with lesson 2 and then the numbers at the bottom of the page start over? Charles de Gaulle was not communist. Starts again with number 1. So go ahead and turn to the page that is labeled 4 that says Hussein McMahon Correspondence. And read that real quick. It's the, yes, you guys are correct. Okay, so the upshot of this document, and if you have a piece of paper next to you, this is probably the first thing that you really actually need to write down, is that basically this is this British dude called McMahon, and he is talking to this dude Hussein, and effectively he is trying to get Hussein to maybe start a little bit of a revolt to mess with the Ottomans during World War I, and in exchange for successfully doing this, he is low-key sort of promising that Britain is going to help establish an Arab state in that area. Angela, it is lesson 2, page 4. So you can see down in the bulleted areas, Great Britain is prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all the regions within the limits commanded by Sharif of Mecca. Okay. And if you look at page 5, you see there are actually maps of Hussein's request and McMahon's response. So it's not actually everything that the Sharif had asked for, but it's there, okay? So this is the British effectively promising this land in exchange for political cooperation / troublemaking / Arab revolt to a group of Arabs after the end of the war. And if you are familiar with modern current events, you can sort of look at those maps and be like, that's the area that later became Israel. That's interesting. Document 2, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1916. Go ahead and read that. That is on page 6 of lesson 2. Okay, so hopefully you've taken a chance to look at the Sykes-Picot Agreement. You can see on the following page on that beautiful color map that there are all of these different zones, some for the British, some for the French, and there is a provision, as you can see in the document, where maybe Russia is going to have some influence over some of that as well. This is in 1916. The other one was in 1915. Then if you go one page beyond that to the one that is labeled 8, you have the Balfour Declaration. This I will just read to you because it is short. It says, "Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor," that's the most important phrase, "view with favor," in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. And this is from 1917. Okay, so in 2 years, the British have promised this land to 3 different people. To the Arabs, they promised it to the Jews, and they also said that they were going to take some and give some to France and low-key also maybe some to Russia. The question that I've asked, and I've asked a lot of different people this because I wasn't there, and I can certainly draw my I can draw my own conclusions. But I guess the thing you need to know is the thing you really need to know is whether or not the British were just incompetent or if they were legitimately deceitful. And I have talked with lots of other people. I mean, I drew my own conclusion, but I've talked with lots of other people who agree with me in the fact that there is no chance that the British were really totally, completely competent or unaware of these things. It was wartime. The British were trying to get their allies as best as they could. They were trying to please different groups of people. You know, I don't even think the British thought they were too stupid. I legit think they just didn't care, right? It's politics, and they're going to say whatever they need to say to get what they want. Call misdirection. Yes, yeah, I like tactical misdirection. That's a fantastic. That sets the stage for subsequent disasters that are going to befall this part of the world. Okay? You might have heard that there has been continued conflict ever since the creation of the State of Israel, and now we can see, wow, we've really, we really see that this is a much older conflict, and that since World War I, so for 100 years now, this has been area in massive conflict, in part because of competing desires for the land itself, but also in a significant way as a direct result of this British nonsense. We hate the everyone here on the AP World Discord. We don't hate everyone. It's just that people lie to get what they want, and it's ugly. It's so ugly. Okay. And then there's another agreement that we're not going to even read because we really can't read all of them. Okay. Let's see. Covenant of the League of Nations. This sets up what is known as the British Mandate. Hannah, on here, you always make me feel like my class is so interesting, but like legit in the classroom, you always look so bored. I'm so confused. Okay. So the League of Nations ends up setting a British mandate, and then the British are basically in charge of that area, which is tricky, because it's not their area. Okay. Let's move on. We are not even going to look at the mandate period. So you can just skip right past everything that says lesson 3 until you get to lesson 3, page 11. And that's a pretty map. It is blue and green with Jerusalem as a little yellow zone. Your crash course video was on Vikings. I did not have a chance to figure that out between when you asked and now. Give me a sec while you figure out what page you need to be on. You're going for lesson 3, page 11, with a map that is entitled the UN Partition Plan. Let me look at Crash Course World History. Actually, I bet I know what happened. Feel free to be honest with me. I feel like I say way too much. Is that a true fact? I feel like I notice it more on here, although I feel like I still did it in the classroom. One thing I kind of love about this is the ability to be a little bit more casual. And of course, since I can't see you, I don't have to be like disappointed if you're not giving me your full and undivided attention, and that's a little bit nice too. So what was the number? Somebody unmute yourself because I don't have my Discord screen up. What is the number of the crash course that I assigned you that was about the Vikings? 24. Oh, okay. So here's what happened. I'm an idiot and I made a mistake is step 1. So crash course episode 24 is actually numbered 223 because they started at 200 and not 201. So the one that I wanted you to watch is Conflict in Israel and Palestine, Crash Course World History 223. And I looked at the episode number, which on the website is directly to the left of the little picture, and it says 24. Whereas the one that is actually titled 224 is the one about Vikings. So I wanted you to watch the one about the conflict in Israel and Palestine. So you should definitely do that later as a review because this is really, it's really pretty complicated and you should do some review for sure. Procrastination came in clutch. Yeah. God. Okay. See, I just did it again. All right. Well, you guys aren't too bad haters. Yes, so you're going to do 223 instead of 224. I'm sorry. There's a reason that I made that mistake, but it was still a mistake. Okay, so let's check out this two-state partition plan. Are you starting your own nationalist movement? Oh, I was going to say the Mahirists. What even? Procrastination nation. Yes, good call. Sweetie pie, it is 1:55 in the afternoon. You should have had lunch like 2 hours ago. Go ask your father. I'm teaching right now. Okay, sorry. Oh, I like young procrats. That's the best one. Okay. No, that was my daughter. That was my daughter. Oh, yes, you do have to spell it young with just a U and no O. UN partition plan. So the proposed Jewish state is in blue, the proposed Arab state is in green, and there's supposed to be an international zone, Jerusalem and its suburbs there in yellow. So what are the reasons that nobody liked this plan? Because nobody liked this plan, except the people who made it up who didn't actually have to live there. I was going to say, don't everybody get excited about this at once. Okay, so part one, yeah, the proposed Arab lands. I mean, yes, okay, so they've got a section along the coast, but not that much. And those are not necessarily the water controlling areas. It is, in particular, the non-contiguousness of it is an issue, right? So they made it so that there are these really skinny sections, so there are like literally intersections between the different areas, but each group is going to have effectively 3 distinct and separate areas, and it's just it. Yes, and it is kind of like East and West Pakistan, and eventually, that stuff tends to not work that great. I don't know how we've managed it with Alaska, but maybe that's because the Canadians are just so chill. Yes, and there are so many different historical claims to it, and really and truly, they say very, very, very much that they are, what's the word? They both say, we were here first. The answer is yes, that is true. Ish. It just depends on how far back you look. If you look to the last 700 years, then this area has been held by several different Muslim dynasties. If you look further back than that, you have a little while when it was held by Christians during the Crusades and it was part of Roman territory, but prior to that, it was held by the Jews. So, yes, they were there first. All of them were there before this. And people came and people went. Most recently, if possession is 9/10 of the law, well, really the Arabs kind of low-key had possession. However, British had this mandate because why? Because they could, really. And then the British pushed very hard, and a lot of other Western European countries pushed very hard for the creation of the State of Israel. So, yes, for a long time, there really weren't huge problems. I will say, though, Fierce, that probably even if the British hadn't mucked it all up, I think problems were coming. Okay, bye, Otis. We'll miss you. Listen to the rest later. Even if the British hadn't been there, I still think that problems were probably coming because Zionism and the idea, not just that people wanted to migrate there, that might not have been such a big problem, but the idea that people wanted to migrate there with the intention of subsequently creating some kind of sovereign entity. Okay, bye, Olivia. Why lemon? What does a lemon have to do with it? Okay. So anyhow, one of the things, and this was maybe the biggest mistake ever. I don't know. It's hard to say which mistake is the biggest and worst of all time. But a thing that happened was that the Palestinians decided to boycott the United Nations conference where they were discussing this partition plan. And that turned out to be a big problem because then the Jewish people who did not subsequently boycott the conference got a chance to go and plead their case and explain why they felt like they needed this and that it was reasonable, et cetera, et cetera. So the Palestinians were not there to represent themselves. The Jewish people were there to represent themselves. And also, like, low-key, a lot of the Europeans were feeling, guilty AF because of the Holocaust and the fact that they didn't really do a whole lot to stop it. And that they didn't seem to be in a tremendously huge hurry to stop it. And I mean, given they didn't understand the full extent, but I mean, there were some ideas and they felt very bad about that. So it was a time when there was lots and lots of global sympathy towards the Jewish population, right? And for good reason. Yeah, so that isn't what ended up happening, okay? So now we are gonna flip some more pages. Okay, so lesson 4, we're going to only do a little bit of, but now we're on to lesson 4, and we will start how much longer? When are we going over the wars? We're going to talk here about the wars, but not a ton. The wars are really not the most the most essential thing. So, Fierce, it is 2:00. Again, nobody here is obligated to be here at all. So if you have stuff that you need to go do and take care of, like, that's cool. I'm not going to be offended, and we're not taking attendance based on people showing up at this anyway. You can listen later because it is being recorded. Thank you again, Liam. So if you need to step away or if you want to step away, those are things that you can do. And I'm really not paying attention to who exactly is present at each individual moment. So you're not going to hurt my feelings. Okay. I'm doing some math. Okay. So the establishment of the State of Israel happens on May 14th of 1948. That might be worth writing down. And then on the very next day, I go play video games. That's the thing you have to do. You don't have to tell me that next time. My life will be better if I don't know that. Indeed, that is a crummy excuse. I have to go play video games. Okay, so the regional boundaries after the 1948 war. Right, and we can look at these different maps, but you can see that Jordan gains some land. Egypt ends up strip, but Israel expands considerably from its initial boundaries. And then you can look at the 1967 war on the next page, and you can see that it gained all of the Sinai Peninsula plus the Golan Heights and the West Bank. Oh, yeah, don't even get me started on the temporary settlements. Literally how to spell Sinai is like on the page in front of you. Okay, so that is on lesson 4, page 9, and then lesson 4, page 11. I mean, or you could just listen to this out loud and do Minecraft at the same time, right? Like, that's not a... I don't think so. No, I can't. We can't hear. Oh, no. Fierce had to go because he has to go play Apex. Well, we skipped a lot of pages. Okay. Well, Fierce didn't tell us who he was playing with, right? Like, not also on this call. Okay. So regional boundaries after the Israel-Egypt peace treaty, 1979. Okay, so that's page 11 of lesson 4. So you should get yourself there. So during this time, so there are a bunch of things that are happening during this time. So there was some concern that in the Israeli War for Independence in 1948, right? So all Israel's neighbors invaded it, like on the very first full day of its existence. They did not acknowledge Israel's sovereignty. They did not acknowledge Israel's right to exist. They did not believe that the state was legitimate. They didn't think that the United Nations had the authority to just draw up a new sovereign state and declare it to be real. And they were like, we're going to take our stuff back. As it turns out, because the United States has always been a really big supporter of Israel, Israel had lots of weapons and lots of well-trained soldiers. Don't look at me. I don't exactly know where they came from.
Actually, this is Mr. Krause. I'm coming in. Oh, sorry. I'm just mic sucking. Yes, they do have nukes now, but actually a lot of the armaments from the 1948 revolution actually, ironically enough, were captured Nazi German rifles. That they took the moment to grab a cold chisel and chisel out the swastikas of, and then start fighting everybody. It is ironic as all get out. And a lot of those troops that were trained were actually French Jews and also Polish Jews that had been evacuated to England during World War II and actually had served with the English army.
Learned some new stuff anyways.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
I also learned yesterday that basically Hamlet. I didn't know that until yesterday. I was today years old when I found that out. So yeah, that was good times. Okay, so Israel expands pretty immediately, which was something that none of its neighbors expected. And there are some reports that do seem to be legitimate. Disney's going to sue. Yes, they sure are, that jerk Shakespeare man. Okay, but there do seem to be pretty reliable reports that there were at least some massacres of Palestinian people, and understandably, the Palestinians were really not very happy about that. Okay? So, and that does seem to be legitimate. Overall, that is not how broadly the people in Israel treated the Palestinian people within the new Jewish state, but again, you don't really have to massacre many people before it becomes a major incident. Yeah, I mean, yes, but that wasn't why.
Everyone needs to.
You teach.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Bye, Samir. Have fun playing Halo or whatever game you're going to go play. Apex, right. Okay. At 2:00. It's cool. Bye. Like, I just don't understand. Why can't you play the game and listen to this? No, you don't have to annotate this whole packet, but hopefully you've taken some notes. Notes. No, somebody typed Fortnite, and I read that. No, I did not hear that they found a mass grave, but that's not surprising. Okay, in Rwanda.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so anyways, right, how do I put my little thumbs down for Fortnite? No, because we're making a joke about somebody leaving to play Fortnite. I think Fortnite itself is fine. Okay. Everybody be okay. Working from home. Okay. So as a result of the belief that Israel was going to be like a temporary situation, and maybe in part because fear of massacres, and also because they were encouraged by their neighbors. Loads and loads and loads of people who are Palestinian fled the new state of Israel and ended up in displaced person camps right along the borders in the Arab countries. Okay, so they got out of Israel. And these displaced person camps were going to be temporary, okay? Yes, Wheat is Arjun. Yes, he is. And all of the countries that were hosting the displaced person camps also thought that they were going to be temporary, but that turns out to not be what happened. However, the Palestinian population did continue to boom in all of these displaced person camps, as well as within the Gaza Strip, et cetera, et cetera. So all of a sudden then, like, you wait 40 or 50 years and you've had people who have lived literally their entire lives in displaced persons camps. They don't know any old Palestine, but the neighboring countries have not like let them in and given them citizenship or even made it possible to gain citizenship. So those populations have just stayed underserved and impoverished and bitter, and I don't know why anybody would have expected anything different. But when it comes time to play the blame game and you want to say, well, who did which bad thing, to grant citizenship to Palestinian refugees is a real problem. Correct. They did fight, but they didn't want Israel there anyways. Like, that had political implications for them. But no, they didn't make it possible for those people to receive citizenship. They didn't make it easy. They still haven't. And that has continued to exacerbate those tensions. Correct. They are in, so you can probably find them in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. I don't think there are any in Egypt, although I could be wrong, but Sinai Peninsula is basically just a desert. I mean, not that the rest of that area isn't also a desert, but the Sinai Peninsula is especially arid. Right. What else? Something that's a bummer. I wish that she were here now. I had a student a couple of years ago whose family was actually Lebanese, and she went to Lebanon most summers, and yeah, she had some really interesting perspectives. Okay, so Egypt in 1979 is the first country to actually diplomatically acknowledge the state of Israel. Sorry, asterisk. Not the first country ever, the first Arab country to do that. Oh, that is a fantastic question, Angela. What is the difference between an internment camp, a displaced person camp, and a concentration camp? And we'll add death camp to the mix there as well. Okay, so an internment camp to leave, you are put there and more or less maintained, but you are not required usually to provide labor. A big detention facility. A displaced person camp, think of a refugee camp. You could hypothetically leave if you like had someplace to go, but you really might not because, you know, you're displaced and all. And then a concentration camp is, I will get to that question in a minute. Concentration camp would be a place where you're putting people, you're requiring slave labor, you are maybe trying to re-educate them, and if in the process they become ill and die, the people in charge don't tend to be very upset. And then a death camp would be a location that is specifically set up to immediately or longitudinally cause the death of the people who live there as like part of a method. So when we talk about genocide, we have to think of about the UN Genocide Convention, which says that genocide is defined by the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, racial, ethnic, or religious group. So in my professional opinion, as an expert on genocide, I would say no, what happened to the Palestinians is not a genocide. That doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean it's fair. It doesn't mean it's right. But was anybody trying to destroy in whole or in part, like as an significant part, systematically on the basis of their ethnicity or religion or race? I would make the argument that the answer to that is no. Did human rights abuses occur? Probably. Are there human rights abuses occurring in the displaced person camps at the hands of the people who were running them? I would hazard to guess, without any specific knowledge, that probably yes. Are there human rights abuses happening to the people living in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? Very possibly. Okay, I mean, that's a controversial statement there, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But very possibly there are things happening that are not okay. But the definition of genocide is very limited and very specific, and the Israelis actually claim quite the opposite. Some people who are from Israel actually would say that the rhetoric that is used to describe what the neighboring countries wanted to do to Israel, specifically the rhetoric was to push them all into the sea. I mean, they didn't say we want them to go into the sea and drown, but I mean, that was kind of implied, but like, is that alone enough to be a genocide? Probably not. But were there people who wanted to eliminate Israel and Israelis as a national group, and did they attempt to do so? I mean, they certainly wanted to. I don't think they ever actually attained that, but there probably were people who had some genocidal ideation or intent, but it, as far as I'm aware, did not happen. Okay. Questions about that so far? Makes me happy to just see your names. Okay. Okay, so Angela, so your systemic killing in order, and it doesn't actually just have to be killing. If somebody wants to put up a link to a copy of the UN Genocide Convention, for those reasons, the group has to be targeting a racial, national, ethnic, or religious group. So like that's part one. There has to be an intent. Like you're not just killing them because it's a war, right? I mean, you could make an argument that war is systemic killing. But war doesn't count as genocide. If you have two groups that are legitimately warring against one another, then that's not a thing. Then genocide's not a thing there. If you have one group that is effectively making war on a group that is unable to defend itself, that might be a different story. But like, it's never genocide if you're killing them because you don't like their political ideals. It's not genocide if you're killing them because they're female. It's not genocide if you are seeing some personal. I said that already. Somebody's asking about Operation Thunderbolt. I don't even know what that is. So probably no, we can't talk about it because I don't have anything. Yeah, so in the Holocaust, resistance. Okay, so in the Holocaust, the resistance that existed was not sufficient to have ever qualified as actual war. And no, so the classes, like if you read the UN Genocide Convention, you cannot, a mass killing of people because of their sex, if the reason is because they were male or because they were female or because they were transgender or whatever, no. Like, genocide can't be against females or males or similar. Like genocide is really a very specific kind of crime. Yeah, so I think that gendercide, I think would be a legitimate thing, and it would describe something different, right? It would be the mass murder of people based on gender. And we've seen that at various times in history where, in particular, female children might be killed or, put out into the wild, which is a nice way of saying that. Okay, so Liam, that's a great question. One of my grad school professors actually came up with this word. She calls it politicide. And the reason that it's different, okay, the reason that politicide doesn't actually count as part of genocide is because at least when the UN Genocide Convention was written, and also according to people who tend to perpetrate genocides, you don't have the ability to change your race. You don't have the ability to change your ethnicity. I mean, maybe now you do, but it certainly wasn't viewed that way in 1948 when the UN Genocide Convention was signed. You don't have the ability to change your religion. Again, modern thinking on that has changed, but usually the people who perpetrate genocide, I mean, think about the Spanish Inquisition, right? Like they were looking at people whose grandparents had converted 2 generations before and saying, maybe you're not a real Catholic because your grandparents were Muslim or your grandparents were Jewish. You're not a real Christian. And that was the way that it was, thank you. Totally lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. Okay, so right. Well, and that was used to justify, right? And we talked about not Zionism. We talked about anti-Semitism. We talked about religious anti-Semitism. We talked about racial anti-Semitism, and we talked about the fact that the Germans construed Jewish people to be a race, whereas realistically, that really is an ethnic group and not a racial group. And if you were to try to smush Semitic people into a racial group, then you would actually get the result that all of the people in Israel that we're talking about now and all of their neighbors who don't much care for the Jewish people would actually all be part of a so-called Semitic race. But again, that is really not a thing. And technically, if you were doing it okay, so number one, race is not a thing. Like that is a social construct. It's really not a biological thing. But if you were to try to make a biological argument, all of your Semitic people, including people who are Jewish and including people who are Arab, would technically be white. And that doesn't fit very well with the way Americans like to pretend race exists.
And also, you were anti-Semitic.
True. And again, sometimes that's sufficient. You couldn't hear him very well?
Yeah.
So what Mr. Krause said was that the idea... Oh, interesting. So what Mr. Krause was saying was that even though we understand anti-Semitism in the modern context to be anti-Jewishness, what Semitism really is a linguistic group, right? So there's a bunch of Semitic languages, right? Like Indo-European languages. So technically anti-Semitism would be equivalent to like anti-Indo-Europeanism, and then you would just have to hate everybody because they speak that particular language. Okay, right. So the Semitic languages are Hebrew, Arabic, Farsi, and Aramaic, which is interesting because we associate those languages with a broad range of regions, historical events, etc. And I mentioned Farsi earlier. Okay. So yeah, so does that answer the questions about genocide and politicide and gendercide? Genocide was sort of the original term, but as it turns out, systematic and mass killing of other groups, even if it isn't technically genocide, is very troubling, and it is tremendously brutal, and those things really do deserve their own legal definitions, but they are different, and that's why they need a different legal definition. So yes, there are genocide-like actions where you have mass killing on the basis of some shared feature of the people you are targeting. Well, we acknowledge now that Rwanda was a genocide. Much to his shame, Bill Clinton had said that acts of genocide were occurring. And there was a reporter, was it Samantha Powers, right? No. There was a reporter who asked him, well, Mr. President, how many acts of genocide have to occur before it is actually a genocide? And I think he just said something like, we're not going to play semantics games right now, or something to that effect. But isn't technically, legally, a minimum threshold for how many people have to be killed for it to be a genocide? I would say that academics probably think it needs to be at least 5,000. And I mean, literally in grad school, one day in class, we had a big old debate about that. We sat around and we tried to decide how many people needed to die for something to be considered a mass killing. And I mean, that's not a very happy topic, but scholars don't necessarily agree on that subject. Okay, so back to these papers. We're going to skip a bunch of stuff. There's a section called Unresolved Issues in the Arab-Israeli Conflict. Talks about refugees, security needs, water resources. The water resources are a huge deal. The settlements are a huge deal. And again, that's a super political discussion, but a thing that has happened is that Israel is a very crowded place. The square footage of the land is not very big, and there are a lot of people who live there and a lot of people who would like to live there, and not necessarily a lot of places that are great for building on. So a thing that has happened is, as Israel has taken over an occupied territory that wasn't initially part of the state of Israel and that is still contested between the Israelis and the Palestinians, a thing that has happened is that Israelis have built what are referred to as settlements in some of the areas that technically are supposed to belong to the Palestinians. Okay, so right now we're not actually on a page. If you want to read more about settlements, there is something in the section that starts with diplomatic relations. It says unresolved issues in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and the settlements are discussed on page 6 of that section. Sorry, that's not a great answer, but it's easier for me to not mess with the PDF and to actually have the paper in front of me while we're typing and I'm reading your guys' comments. I am not familiar with that. I'll have to look it up. Were they killed explicitly because they were Maori? Because if they were killed specifically because they were Maori, then that would be a genocide. If there was a legitimate war where both sides had, well, okay, so I, as a genocide scholar, would discourage you from believing everything you read about lists of genocides. Some people include things that might be questionable. So yeah, so in this case, just because Wikipedia said it doesn't necessarily make it true, but if the intent to exterminate them was on the basis of their race and then they did, then yeah, that would be a genocide. Yes, Mr. Krause has his hand raised.
So,
okay.
Oh, okay, down in New Zealand? Can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me? You can hear me. One more.
All right. So, you have to understand, genocide is a very loaded term. What we're dealing with when we're talking about Maori or indigenous peoples, oftentimes are Aborigines in Australia, or even arguably Native Americans in the United States, although I can make that argument both ways. The term would be ethnic cleansing. What we're trying to do is, as far as the we being the colonizers or the dominant group, is trying to remove people who we view as lesser from the terrain or the resources so we can more dominate and use them, because we see our use of those resources as more worthy and valuable for society and the world.
Okay.
But ethnic cleansing is
Correct. And one of the textbooks, when I taught AP Human, one of the textbooks said something that I flat out thought was wrong about ethnic cleansing. So simply removing a group of people, even if it is on the basis of one of those genocide protected classes, simply relocating a population, which is technically what ethnic cleansing is not genocide all by itself. However, if you kill them on the way, you kill them along the way, then maybe it is genocide, and frequently ethnic cleansing is a precursor to genocide. But here's what I do want to say about the war thing, right? So I've talked about Namibia and my own research about what happened in German Southwest Africa. You can have a legitimate war that turns into a genocide. And that's what happened in the case of the Germans in German Southwest Africa. There was a legitimate war. There were battles, there were warriors on both sides. But then when the battle was over and it was pretty clear that there was a loss, then that was when the Germans pushed the people into the desert, shot anybody who came out of the desert, poisoned the watering holes, with the extent to exterminate that group. So even if there had been a war and a peace deal, if one of the groups stopped fighting and the other group just flat out slaughtered them on the basis of race or national origin or ethnicity, then yes, that is a genocide. And if you read the UN Genocide Convention, there are other ways to commit genocide besides merely, in scare quotes, besides merely killing people. Two of the other things are preventing births within the group. So if you were to, say, perform mass sterilizations against a particular group, if you were to, another one is to remove children from one group and transfer them to another group, which you actually see pretty clearly, especially in Aboriginal populations in Australia. I would recommend the movie, I'm going to type this in. There's a fantastic movie called A Rabbit-Proof Fence that last year, but it's a really eye-opening film. It's not like a happy film, but it really shows the way Aboriginal children were taken from their families. They were put into boarding schools. They were made to wear Western clothing. They were punished if they spoke their indigenous languages. They were forced to convert to Christianity. And then you're like, oh, that constitutes a genocide. And by the way, that's also a thing that was done to Native American children here in the United States. The Dawes Act. Okay, so Agent Orange, no. We didn't know that it would give birth defects to the next generation, right? So their intent is a piece of it. So no to the Agent Orange. The eugenics movement, so the sterilization of people like we read about, or like we listened to on the podcast, wasn't probably widespread or systematic enough to justify having been called a genocide. But certainly one of the things that Nazi Germany was pondering on the basis of eugenics was they were trying to figure out if they could just kill off the Jewish race by sterilizing them all. That was something that was considered. Right. Okay. But Liam, the question there is, was it systematic? I mean, maybe it would be, but then as to whether or not it would be genocide, was it on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, or religion? And in the case of the United States, technically, I don't think so, because I think it was on the basis of so-called asocial behaviors and or disabilities. So intentional and systematic, okay, but then not technical, like then it's not one of those classes that's protected by the UN Genocide Convention. That doesn't make it less bad. It continues to be equally horrifying. It definitely does not become less bad, but it just happens to not be genocide. And one of the annoying things about the term genocide is that people tend to have the misunderstanding that something is worse if it is genocide, but that's not necessarily true, right? Like, horrifying things are horrifying, whether it's technically a genocide or not. But since most people agree broadly that genocide is exceptionally bad, you get groups who want to claim that term, even though it really doesn't actually apply. I mean, right, crimes against humanity are still horrifying. They're not less horrifying than genocide. They just happen to have a name that doesn't get as much recognition, which is messed up. So there isn't necessarily a timetable over how long a genocide lasts, but it has to have intent. It has to have the goal of extermination. And it has to apply to one of those four groups. Yeah, it is literally a legal definition. Okay, so Zach, on the basis of ability, well, true, certain races were more prone to being marked as disabled. As it turns out, also, impoverished people were also more prone to being marked as disabled. On the basis of ability or lack thereof, that would still fit into that eugenics category. Okay, so yes, Chinese killing of Tibetans, I would say that is on the basis of both religion and national origin and maybe some ethnicity if you squint and look sideways on it. Do you mean, you don't mean the Han, you mean the Cham. So yes, the Chinese killing the Tibetans, yes, I would say that could sincerely be labeled as a genocide. Right, you have the Uyghurs who are being killed right now. When we talked a couple of weeks ago about the Khmer Rouge, they were killing their own people. They were killing other Khmer people for the most part, so that technically wasn't a genocide, but then when they started killing the Cham Muslim people because they were Muslim, then that part does count as a genocide. And let's talk about this. Okay, so Sushruth, is that you? 211? Sushruth? Okay, so there it depends on what the intention of the British was. We have, but like this is important, and it's 20th century history. We're not off topic specifically. And you know, I like to talk about genocide. I mean, because that's my specialization. Okay, so check it out. also specifically targeted the educated portion, but there's no like smarticide or nerdicide. Those are not things. I mean, they could be. I told you this was going to last. I told you this was going to last. We're not even there yet. I've got 20 more minutes, and then I will actually have to go in 20 minutes because I have to watch the zoo broadcast, and I also recommend that you do so as well. But we're going to get done with this. Yes, geekicide. Okay, but check it out. So it depends on whether or not the British took the food with the intent to kill the Indian people, or if they took the food with the intent to be greedy and get rich, and it was an accident. And I mean like an actual accident, not like an accident. One of the things that we also talk about in genocide scholarship is this concept of what's known as malign neglect. So neglecting somebody with bad intention, maybe to cause their death, and can malign neglect be a vehicle for genocide? Yes. And like when we look at the Ukrainian famine, where the Russians, they totally wanted to sell that wheat in the United States and get wealthier off that. And was it totally convenient that 10 million of these really inconvenient Ukrainians who lived on this beautiful Ukrainian land that the Russians really just wanted to have for themselves? Was that an undesirable effect? No. Was it predictable? Yes. Were the Russians happy about it? Probably. So enough about the British motivation in that case of the massive starvation, but was to starve the people so that the British would no longer have to contend with them, and that a portion of the population would be effectively eliminated or exterminated, then yes, that could be genocide. But if they were just stupid and made greedy and really bad choices, but were like, oh crap, now we just killed all these people who used to do farming for us, and now we're going to be less productive, and dang it, then that wouldn't be genocide. Right, and that's the thing, right? And this is a big thing when you look at legal definitions of anything, is that the definitions are usually pretty specific. So accidental mass killing of a national group is not genocide. It has to be intentional. And really that's like the difference between murder 1, murder 2, and manslaughter, right? Like murder 1 is premeditated and intentional. Murder 2 is intentional but not premeditated. Manslaughter in the first degree is unintended but but preventable. And then manslaughter in the second degree, is unintended but not really preventable. Just tell me and I'll repeat it for them. We actually have talked about it.
It's about the intent.
That accidental mass killing sounds like an oxymoron, but especially for something like food, if you truck all the food out of a region for a purpose other than to disadvantage the local population, and then, because maybe you thought more food would grow, or you thought it was all going to be okay, and then you're like, whoops, it can happen. I'm so sorry, it can. So the other thing Mr. Krause was saying was that, what were you saying? Walked away. He's playing Super Mario Brothers right now. I don't remember. Side? Okay, I don't remember what he said, and he doesn't remember what he said, and I got distracted by one of your all's questions. Dang it, Liam. Yes, mass killing via stupidity is a real thing that humans do. So also, maybe some of you were wondering about the bombing. Okay, yep, got it. So that's the other reason that we don't consider what happened to, say, the Aztecs to be genocide, right? Because the Europeans, so again, this really literally is accidental mass killing, is that the Europeans didn't understand germs. They didn't know that smallpox was a thing. They didn't know that people in the New World had no immunity. They literally did not knowing that that would happen. And so, yes, was it as a result of their actions, like getting on a boat and going over here? Yes, but the killing off of 95% of the population really was an accident. Yes, there was legitimate warfare, absolutely, but legitimate warfare wasn't the thing that ended up extinguishing most of that population. Okay, Zach, I understand. Well, we've only got 15 more minutes, so maybe you can just listen to the last 15 minutes if you would like. Okay, so let's go to the very end of this packet. I would say that that was genocidal. Gassing the Kurds, I would say that that was genocidal, and we probably should have treated it like a genocide, because I think it was. Yeah, we've only got 15 more minutes, y'all. Is mass re-education without killing still a genocide? I guess it depends on how you go about doing it. Right? Like, is it forced assimilation, or is it beyond that? Right? Like when you're transferring the kids. Okay, so at this point, what page? It's very close to the back. You're looking at, these are actually copies of PowerPoint slides, and it starts at the top with "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." Okay, so these slides are super interesting. This is a review. I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but you should read them. So these notes are from a professor of mathematics at U of L. You're like, how even? Okay, so at the bottom it says 5/5/2014, notes by Ibrahim Imam. So Dr. Imam was a math professor, but he's also a Palestinian refugee. And one thing that I pondered, because he, wow, literally I can now see enough people left. I can totally see Firas' name. He is absolutely playing Apex right now. That is incredible. Okay, so I'm just saying, like, I don't care that he's playing Apex, but like maybe sign out of Discord so the teacher can't see that that's what you're doing. I mean, I don't know, just a thought. I don't really care that much, though. It's funny to me. Because over on my right-hand side, it tells me what games people are playing. Yeah, so anyways, Firas, what's up? I hope that you're having good success. Yes, he did say he was not trying to be sly. I would have gone on invisible mode, like, just saying. But yes, no, there was no dishonesty. He was completely clear. I've got to go play video games. Gotcha. Also, Firas has got his nickname set on here to be Firas on my server, but every time, like, just know, people, that every time you send me an individual message, I can see your real username. So if if you think that your real username would be embarrassing for your teacher to read, just bear that in mind. This is a temporary situation. It's going to go away eventually, but right now, if you do send me an individual message, I can totally see your actual name. Yeah, well, and the first time he sent me a message, I was like, could you change your nickname? And he totally did, but like still, like, it's still there. Okay. See, this is why you should stay in class and not go play video games. Oh, you people are dropping off. We're down from 52 people to 22. I've bored everybody. Nope, we're not going to talk about it anymore. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Okay. So here's the thing, though. Dr. Imam came because one of my teacher friends actually had some Israeli soldiers or a member of the Jewish community here in Louisville. We different things. But we had them come talk to our classes, and then we had some Palestinians. One year we had Dr. Imam, who was a Palestinian refugee, come and talk to our classes. And then another year we actually had an activist whose dad was like the head of the Communist Party here in Kentucky. Like, did you even know that that was a thing? I didn't know that that was a thing until then. But he came, and this is the slideshow that he brought us. And this is interesting when we're thinking about sourcing, because he does show his sources. He has got a section here on that first page. It says published by Jews for Justice in the Middle East. And he's got that. He's got some of his own interpretations of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. He's got a map. He's got some things about the Palestinian diaspora. So he's looking at that. My favorite slide, did Palestinians really flee? Yep, see you later. Why did Palestinians really flee? He talks about the Deir Yassin massacre of Palestinians by Jewish soldiers, which was apparently on April the 9th of 1948. And he does cite his sources there. And then the next slide talks about the meeting with Harry Truman, where Harry Truman says, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I have to answer to hundreds of thousands who are anxious for the success of Zionism. I do not have hundreds of thousands of Arabs among my constituents." And I do believe that to be a real quote. And then there's also, yes, you have to go too. That's perfect. And there's another quote there from Nathan Goldman, who was a former president of the World Jewish Congress, talking about why would Arabs make peace. He says, "This is natural. We have taken their country. Sure, God promised it to us, but what does that matter to them?" And so on and so forth. So this is a really, really emotionally fraught issue. I love the thumbs down. This is really a very emotionally fraught issue for people on both sides. And in fact, both of the years that we did these talks with 4 different groups, the Israeli groups and the Palestinian groups did not even want to come at the same time. They were like, nope, we can, we'll go, and then they can go, and then we'll come back and answer questions after they hear from the other group, and then they can come back and answer questions. So it was super interesting because each class got to hear from each group twice, so it took like 4 class periods to actually do this activity. But it was tremendously interesting, and it was really, really good for seeing that people are very passionate and feel very strongly that they're right and entitled on both sides of this issue, but also that it really is complex. So that's what I've got about that. Are there other questions that you guys have about the Arab-Israeli conflict? There's a movie, I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but when I remember it, or somebody can post on here and ask me a question, when I remember it, I will post it to see if you can see it. It's very violent, but it really does an amazing job of sort of showing what life is like in the Palestinian areas that are controlled by Israel right now. And it's really not a pretty picture. It's not good. I would look through, I skipped over 2 different timelines in those packets. So you might want to look at the timelines to get more of a sense. I didn't talk about the intifadas at all, which means uprising. I didn't talk about that at all. Oh, that's a loaded question. Why does the U.S. favor Jews? Okay, well, I'll do my best. This is not my personal opinion, but I will do my best to explain. 1, broadly, I think there is definitely still some Holocaust-themed guilt Next, I think that from a religious perspective, people who are Christian feel, again, broadly, and not my personal perspective, but broadly feel more of a connection to Judaism than they do to Islam because, right, so, and that being because there is the Jewish connection in the Old Testament and sort of the idea that Jesus was Jewish. So there's a connection there. Religiously, like I know people who are like alive and walking around now that are like my age who definitely very much believe that the Jews are God's chosen people and that it is the duty of American Christians. But so it's literally I love that. I would love if that shows up on the bingo. But well, we were talking about Andy Bashir bingo, and I was like, oh my gosh, do you guys have a bingo for me? And as far as I can tell, nobody said yes, but there's discussion of creating a bingo. Okay. Okay. And everyone heard me say what, for God's sake? Or they heard me say what? This is not my perspective. Something about Jewish people. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Well, this will be posted publicly on the internet. They can hear the whole context of those comments. But so here's the deal, is that I definitely know people right now, like American Christians, who because religiously they believe that Jewish people are God's chosen people, that they literally have a duty to support the state of Israel, specifically because of their religious beliefs. So that's another reason. That is not a thing that I say most of the time, though. Like, that doesn't make for good bingo. Okay, so, and the other piece is that because the way the monotheistic religions developed, Christian people have somewhat less connection to Muslim beliefs, right? Like it's not part of, Danny, that's great. Right, you should get one for just laughing. Mrs. Krause laughs at herself. Also, Mrs. Krause laughs at her own joke. I know, recording stops at 3. I'm going to be gone by 3 as well, so I'm literally just about done. But just speaking to that last question, that in the popular American imagination, in the Judeo-Christian heritage of the United States, that there isn't, like, Islam just does not feature as prominently. And then certainly, unfortunately, because of 9/11 and you saw even with coronavirus, there's been a huge spike in racism against folks from anywhere in Asia. Once 9/11 happened, then there was this major wave of anti-Islam sentiment here in the United States, and that, right, well, yeah. Yes, and also people, like, right, there was that one time a Sikh temple was shot up because the guy who shot it up thought they were Muslim, so he, like, murdered people of the wrong faith because he was ignorant. So yeah, so all of that. Yes, people sometimes do very bad things. People sometimes do good things, though. You should walk around and look at the rainbows and all of the chalk art that says we are in this together. People sometimes do good things as well. But yeah, so that's it for today. I got through everything I wanted to get through, which doesn't normally happen. Doesn't normally happen in class, so that's exciting. And next week, we will talk about decolonization and globalization, and then we will be done with all of the new content, and then we will start learning how to write a 10-point DBQ. Whoa, bro, Fierce is back. Oh my gosh, I would love that. I would love that, Sush Ruth. Quick question. My zoo thing starts in 60 seconds. Hey, can you get kids for the zoo? The short answer is not really. Bye, Liam.